Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, BlackHearts, Amazon, and Vagabond. Yeah, so we're going to be moving on and we're going to be reading chapter 2. I think that I might take a bit of time to talk about the chapter and what the background or what where the chapter comes from in terms of cultural background and cultural basis and how it fits into the larger story here. But like I said before, we'll be reading just snippets and then we'll talk a bit about what I've read and what my own thoughts were when I was writing this chapter. So, if you're new to the channel, the name of the channel is Black Hearts, Amazon, and Vagabond. Basically, we'll be looking at this book I wrote. Um, the description is down there. You can read the description, read it in the description of the video. And yeah, subscribe and yeah, pick up a copy. It's on Amazon and have a read yourself. Like I said, I'm reading snippets just to give you teasers of what the chapters are about. What the chapters are about. So let's get into it. Black Hearts, Amazon, and Vagabond, Chapter 2. Odogbolu, 1851. Idogbe stood beside Bahami, his father, as he knelt on one knee and took aim at a deer that stood about 80 to 100 meters away at the edge of the plain where it met the rainforest. There were several deer around of both sexes, but his father had selected a young female with no fawn as his target. Idogbe stood with his bow in his left hand and a quiver full of poison-tipped arrows, but none knocked in his bow. At that range, the deer was not too far for an arrow, but his father thought it better and more efficient to use his flintlock. He could hit the deer with his arrow, but they would have to chase it down with the dogs, which they had not brought along this time. The dogs tended to make a lot of noise and often alerted prey to their presence long before they could acquire a target. The loud report of his father's shot was eroded with the collapse of the deer and the flight of the entire herd as well. They broke cover and walked towards the fallen animal as its life ebbed away, its blood leaking away through the single wound in its chest. The animal bleated feebly as his father brought out his jackknife and put the poor beast out of its misery, allowing the blood to flow freely from an artery in its neck till it stopped thrashing. He then proceeded to quarter the carcass, taking the hefty limbs, the head, and midsection, while leaving the legs for the scavengers that would soon gather. Idogbe moved off a little distance to cut a stout branch from a nearby tree, trimming off the branches till he had a stout length they could lift between them. He took out his knife and made a hole through the flesh big enough to thread a rope, and then he passed between the joints, which he passed between the joints, and then passed the staff beneath the ropes. That done, he stood and waited for his father, who had just sheathed his jackknife and was about to reload his musket. Idugbe remembered the first hunt he went on with his father and the question he had asked about why he reloaded after a hunt. We are not the only hunters out here. There are others with claws and fangs that won't wait for us to leave the carcass. If they attack us when we are defenseless, then we become prey as well. Bahami loaded his gun with gunpowder from a small waste bag and then put a small bullet down the muzzle and rammed it down with a rod. That done, he poured a little more of the black powder down the flash pan to prime it and then closed it. Then he slung the gun over his right shoulder and together they hefted the staff over their shoulders and began the trek through the jungle home. The walk home was a quiet one, but Idogbe's eyes took in every leaf and animal they managed to spot in the dense jungle canopy, from the catcalls of monkeys deep in the foliage to the leaves of the medicinal plants his grandfather had shown him. The jungle is full of all sorts of plants for healing and for death as well. different plants for different uses. He remembered his grandfather saying, his father's father was a respected traditional healer whose fame spread as far as Abeokuta, the land of the Egbas. None of his sons had taken after him, but Idogbe had shown some interest, and his grandfather seemed determined to teach the 15-year-old as much as he could before he joined his ancestors. As they walked on, Idogbe took in the sight of the Dogon tree, so called by the Fulani, which was used to make a concoction for treating the fevers that came often in the rainy seasons. He spotted another whose leaves could be ground into a paste and rubbed into wounds to heal them. He also saw the Ahayon tree, amongst a few others. Its branches, when trimmed, would serve as a sturdy piece either for a walking stick or for a splint to hold broken bones together. He had watched his grandfather set the broken bones of the palm wine tapper's leg after a fall from the tree. It was not easily done, but once the man had been put to sleep with a liberal amount of wine and one of his grandfather's potions, the deed was done, and the man's leg tied between the two pieces of Ahoyan wood with strips of cloth. Another longer one had been given to him when the time came for him to return home, ostensibly to use as a crutch until he could manage again on his own without pain. Idogbe loved to sit beside his grandfather as he pointed out various potions, what they were for and what they were made of as well. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be like his grandfather yet. He would not mind being a hunter like his father, although Bahami was more than just a hunter. He was a farmer as well and thought a lot more about the hard work that provided for his family than potions that waited for men to fall ill before being of any use to them. That said, he did not discourage his son, knowing full well that his father's art must be passed on. If it was to Idogbe, then so be it. Idogbe was the fourth child of his mother, but not the last. His father had two wives, and his mother was the first, with 5 children of her own. Idogbe had been preceded by a pair of twins, Taiwa and Kehinde, his eldest brother and sister, and then Idowu, his immediate elder sister. The two pregnancies that followed his birth had resulted in a stillbirth and a baby who had died not 20 days after birth. Finally, his mother had given birth to another child who lived, whom they called Ojo, as his umbilical cord had been entwined around his neck at birth. I guess we'll stop here. Now, um, this book, the story takes its background, like I said, uh, in Nigeria, in Western Nigeria, in what was the old Oyo Empire. Particularly, this part of the story is taking place in Odogbolu. Odogbolu is to the southwest of the old Oyo Empire. Odogbolu is where the Ijebus live, and they would have been bounded to the west by the Egba, and then to the east, southeastwards would lead you down to Lagos and then to the ports at the sea. So there, of course, that means there's a lot of trade that goes on. The Jebus were known to be quite traders, and this made them wealthy as well. And flintlocks were what we tended to call growing up as Dane guns. They are guns that did not use bullets, the kind of bullets we use these days. So you had to prime it with gunpowder and then strike a flint with the firing mechanism. This then uh, 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 burned down and then set the gunpowder to flame, which delivered the bullet through the gun. They were effective, although their range is definitely nothing to compare to the range of modern day guns. But they were still quite useful and they were used extensively because guns were what the British, the Danish, the French, and other visitors to the West African coast uh, dealt with. They would exchange guns for all sorts of things. They would exchange guns for slaves. They would exchange guns for produce, whatever they could get, cloth. They would exchange guns for these things, and whatever ever else they could exchange, they would. So guns were abundant in the southwest, and if you know anything about the history of Yorubas, they featured prominently in the wars that Yorubas fought among themselves. So Idogbe had a bow and arrow, but we were using guns even in the 1800s. Guns are not new to West Africa. They're quite a weapon that most West Africans were familiar with. And yeah, so that's a bit of background to this. Um, of course, I also mentioned about a little bit about what we call infant mortality. Uh, Children died a lot in those days, and that's where part of our culture, in which we don't name children before the seventh day of life, comes from. A child that survives past the seventh day probably would live, and that was part of why we all in Yoruba land, at least, we don't name our children until the seventh day, and it's a custom that has stayed with us. So, well, that's a few pages into chapter two. Uh, get the book, read it. There's a lot of history for those interested in the history of the Southwest. There's a lot of history there, and yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.